Hay preguntas cuyas respuestas requieren de una valoración más profunda que un simple sí o un no. Contestaciones que escapan del blanco y el negro, que no caen en las falsas dicotomías o en reflexiones simplistas sobre una realidad que es vasta y heterogénea. Si algo puede asegurarse sin dudar, es que el mundo siempre es complejo y nuestra existencia es un mosaico de interpretaciones posibles. Con esto en mente y desde las instalaciones del Centro Fox, se hablará con el Dr. Steven Pinker, un psicólogo experimental, científico cognitivo, lingüista y escritor de origen canadiense. Él ha dedicado su vida a comprender la complejidad de las acciones y las relaciones humanas desde la psicología. Steven Pinker es nuestro invitado hoy en La Era de las Definiciones.
Muy buenas noches, amigas y amigos. Qué gusto estar nuevamente con ustedes desde Centro Fox, con personajes que verdaderamente son relevantes a nivel mundial, que están haciendo un impacto grande en el mundo entero, en comunidades, en estados, en naciones, que nos sirven de alguna manera de iluminación para el camino a recorrer. En esta ocasión tengo aquí conmigo al doctor Steven Pinker. Él es escritor y del Departamento de Psicología en Harvard University, de la Universidad de Harvard. Steven Pinker es un psicólogo experimental que realiza investigaciones en composición visual, en psicología, en relaciones sociales. Él creció en Montreal, canadiense, en Ottawa. Tiene una licenciatura de McGill de la universidad y su doctorado en Harvard. Actualmente es profesor de psicología en Johnston, en Harvard. También ha enseñado en Stanford, en MIT, bueno, en lo mejor de lo mejor. Ha ganado numerosos premios y reconocimientos por su investigación, por su enseñanza, por sus 9 libros, incluidos The Language Instinct, How the Mind Works, The Blank State, The Better Angels of Our Nature, The Sense of Style. Es miembro electo de la Academia Nacional de Ciencias en los Estados Unidos, 2 veces finalista del premio Pulitzer, humanista del año, receptor de nuevos y muchos premios en otros lugares del mundo. Su libro más reciente, con el que ha hecho un impacto mundial y que es mi preferido, es Enlightenment, y de eso vamos mucho a hablar en este programa. Así que pues me da un enorme honor, un enorme gusto tener aquí a Steven Pinker, este personaje de fama mundial. Steven, welcome to this program.
Gracias, thank you.
It's on national TV, and that I'm glad that you're here at Centro Fox, that you're here in this presidential library, first one ever built outside of the United States, and where we dedicate our time, our efforts to leadership. And but leadership also needs some light, some clarity on where we're heading and what is coming on this 21st century, which is a surprise every minute of the day. It's a surprise every day, every month, and so on and on. So thank you for being here with us, and if you please share with the audience a little bit of your start. Where were you born? What were your first days in school and in your community, and later on university?
I was born in Montreal, Canada. I grew up in the English-speaking minority, so I'm not a native French speaker. was in the Jewish minority within the English minority within the French minority in Canada, because Canada is majority English speaking. I was always interested in ideas. My family, my friends, we were always discussing things, arguing. There's an old expression, 10 Jews, 11 opinions. So there's a lot of debate, and I was a child in the 1960s when it seemed like everything was up for debate. Should we be anarchists? Should we be Marxists? Should we be capitalists? Do we need a government? Everything was being discussed, and it all came down really, I thought, to human nature. What kind of animals are we? Are we naturally cooperative? Are we naturally selfish? Are we naturally violent? Are we naturally peaceful? Now, of course, the real answers are much more complex than yes, no, but it felt to me that the center of all of these debates was the human mind. There's a saying from James Madison, the great American founder, what is government but the biggest of all reflections on human nature? So I went into cognitive psychology at McGill University. That is, psychology not in the sense of psychotherapy or emotional problems, and I can't do any of that, but the science of how we see, how we speak, how we remember, how we think. And for me, I ended up concentrating on language. How do we share our thoughts just by making noise? An important scientific problem. How do children learn their first language without lessons, without homework, without exercises, but all children learn to speak? That's an interesting scientific mystery. What does language say about the human mind, about our thoughts, our emotions? But I was also interested in big questions about human nature. I don't believe that the mind is a tabula rasa, a blank slate. I believe that there is such a thing as human nature. We have desires, we have ways of thinking, we have ways of learning. But the controversies about human nature are both scientific controversies, what do the genes do in wiring up the brain, but they're also political and moral controversies. And I've explored, in addition to the facts about how the mind works, why that topic is so emotional, so political.
But this that was in your mind being young, that's what took you to choose psychology in university? Or once you were in that career in university, then you started developing all this?
When I entered university, I took different subjects that all had something to do with the human mind. I took sociology, I took anthropology, I took philosophy, I took psychology. But psychology seemed to me to be special because it combined big, deep, profound questions with a way of studying them that was practical. That is, we bring in people into the lab and have them look at words on a screen or fill out questions and gather data. And so you could make progress in studying these questions. For me, that was what was special about psychology. And cognitive psychology, a new field at the time I was a student, seemed exciting. It seemed to be that's where new ideas were coming. And I also thought if I wanted a job as a professor, it's an expanding field, they're more likely to be jobs.
And that was your aspiration, to be a professor and to keep searching and to keep working on the subject?
Yeah, at one point I was a teenager and I did not know what I wanted to do. And I talked with my mother. I said, I like ideas. I like to think. I like to explain. And she says, you want to be a professor. You want to be in the university is the place for you.
Good, and that's where you ended up.
And that's where I ended up.
Okay, and and then you decided to share your learnings, your experiences, your knowledge through books. And
yes.
You've been writing different books, and most of them a great success.
Yes, my first two books were books by a professor for other professors, very, very technical, and students in language and how language works, how children acquire language. But then I did reach out. I decided to write a book not just for academics, for professors, but for anyone who is curious about language. The language instinct, el instinto del lenguaje in Spanish. All of my books have been translated into Spanish. And that one thing led to another. Then I wrote about the blank slate, tabula rasa, about the idea that human nature is politically controversial. That led me to make a discovery that shocked me, which is that if you look at violence, rates of homicide, rates of war, violence against women, violence against children, slavery, and you plot them on a graph, it goes down. Most people don't realize that. You can't tell that from the news because the news focuses on what's happening now. And as long as violence has not gone down to zero, there's always lots to report. It's only when you look at it over time that you realize that something very important has happened in human history. And so I wrote a book on that, The Better Angels of Our Nature, borrowing the phrase
And that's
from Lincoln.
global violence.
Global violence, that's right.
It's
been going not steadily down. There are ups and downs, and different countries have different rates, but overall the tendency has been to go down. Most people don't realize this.
Yeah, because I'm thinking on Mexico. Mexico today is the exception to that world trend. We're on the rise.
Yes. Well, Mexico's a
very special reasons.
Very interesting case in Mexico, because yes, Mexico has a high homicide rate now certainly compared to the United States. The United States has a higher homicide rate than Canada or Europe. Mexico's still higher, but even Mexico's rate has come down. In 1930s, Mexico's homicide rate was probably 3 times higher than what it is now. So even Mexico follows the trend, although Mexico is here, yes. United States is here, Europe is here.
But you know that once that you mentioned United States, that is, of course, a much lower rate than what we have in Mexico today. It still is the case that United States has 50 cities that have a higher rate of crime than Mexico.
Yes.
So it's also selective. It depends. What would be the reason for having a violent Chicago compared to other cities in the United States? Even Washington City is quite high, the crime rate, and others are much more peaceful. That's a product of society, community, education.
Yes, it's definitely education, cohesive communities, but also intelligent policing. That one of the things that drives violence down, at least in the United States where it's been studied a lot, and to be honest, no one really knows. There's still a lot of question marks. But one of the most effective tactics is intelligent policing, because you mentioned that many American cities are worse than Mexico, and crime is very uneven. In most places, it's only some states that have most of the violence. Within the states, it's some cities. Within cities, it's some blocks. Within some blocks, it's some individuals or gangs. If the police know who's committing most of the violence and they converge on the worst neighborhoods, the worst blocks, and they send them the message, if you keep shooting, we'll put you in jail. If you don't shoot, we'll get you a job.
Okay. Give me a minute, we're going to a break and we'll come right back. Okay. Enseguida regresamos con ustedes.
A principios del 2019, fue publicado el Annual Report de la Junta Internacional de Fiscalización de Estupefacientes, un organismo internacional independiente encargado de vigilar la aplicación de los tratados de fiscalización internacional de drogas, creado en el año 1968. El documento explica que, a pesar de las políticas prohibicionistas que se han desplegado en buena parte de los países del mundo, el consumo de estupefacientes es una realidad que rebasa la legislación aplicable, un escenario que invariablemente invita a la reflexión sobre los viejos paradigmas que prevalecen o que intentan prevalecer en esta época de cambio y de nuevos paradigmas y definiciones.
Stephen, as you will understand, The case of Mexico is a specific produce of drugs, cartels, and the war on crime. Because before we decided to go full power use in trying to control crime, it got worse. The thing is that we're in between the drug produced in the South being transferred or moved to the North, to United States, and we just happen to be in between.
Yeah.
And we just happen to have this war on drugs that nobody else has, and war on cartels. And it's 80,000 kids a year that we lose, killed on the streets. When I ended up my term, the crime rate was excellent compared to others. It was brought down to 9.
Yes.
9 out of each 100,000 inhabitants.
Yeah.
But when President Calderon brought in the army and started trying to get rid of the problem, it provoked the contrary. Crime rate went up to 28 in just 1 year, from 9 to 28. Now has come down to around 22, but it still is very, very bad.
Still very high.
Case. So it's difficult to understand why we have a state like Yucatan in Mexico and Campeche in Mexico that is clean. Crime rate might be there 3 or 4%. When you go to cities like Juarez or right now Guerrero, Acapulco, then it goes way up to 40 or 50. It's incredible the way it moves.
Yes,
And,
especially in Mexico.
The way you approach this issue, and we will move on to other issues, but it's something that Mexico is searching for. How do we get out of this trap? How can we control this? And governments come and go. We try different strategies. We try different methodologies, and yet we have not found the answer. And finally, new government that just came in, he says he's promising that he will control and that he will solve in a 2-year term. I think we've been on this for 20 years and don't know if it can be solved. But anyway, we must keep trying. And what you said, this way of using maybe technology up to the last piece of the chain where the crime is committed, if you can identify those places that are higher in this rate and tackle them, maybe that could solve, instead of working nationwide with no response.
Yes. Well, that helps with the numbers just because of the mathematics of crime. It's very uneven, very lopsided, as you noted. In general, you get high rates of violence when there is anarchy. In the United States, in the Wild West, the old cowboy movies, there really were high rates of violence. In failed states, in mountainous regions that are beyond the reach of the law. Sicily, remember the Godfather movies, in Southeast Asia. Generally, the rule of law can bring down rates of crime, but then there are often zones of anarchy when there's contraband. Because if you're in business with something that is illegal and you have a business dispute, you can't file a lawsuit. If someone threatens you, you can't call the police. You've got to be more violent than your competitor. And in almost any part of the world where there's a contraband economy, the rate of violence goes up. In the United States, one of the most violent periods was during Prohibition. In the 1920s, the rate of violence went down. Then when Prohibition of alcohol was repealed, the violence rate went way down in the 1930s. So how you deal with that is, I think, still unclear, and we have to be humble, open-minded, realize we really don't know the answer in general, and look at data, look what works, what doesn't work, be, I think, scientific about it.
Now let's get to your great book, Enlightenment. We come from kingdoms, empires, then fascism, beginning of last century, then this conflict, this shock between communism, socialism, and capitalism and markets. And then there's a winner, liberalism. But right now, there seems to be an empty space. We don't know where we're going when we're seeing all this philosophy now pretending to take us back to the old times of a strong state, controlling borders, controlling people, controlling media. Share with us your vision to the future, that wonderful book that I love.
Oh, thank you.
That at the very end, the light could be in the enlightenment.
Yeah, there is a gap, a vacuum, because people who are not authoritarian nationalists, people who are not religious fundamentalists, people who are not Marxists, what are they? No one knows what they're supposed to be defending. Now there are various names. Some people call it cosmopolitanism, or secular humanism, or the open society, or liberalism. I identified it with the Enlightenment, la Ilustración, and I identified it as a commitment to reason. That is, we try to figure out how to solve our problems. We don't fall back on tradition or scripture or authority or charisma, constantly analyze our situation. Science, we apply reason to the world. Humanism, that is, we value the well-being of men, women, and children, not the glory of the nation or the tribe. And if we do that, we can make progress. These I think are the ideals of the Enlightenment. The ideas were popular in the 18th century. They're associated with some of the founders of the United States, like Madison and Hamilton and Jefferson. But I think they really only became highly influential after World War II, after 1945, when we had the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We had the United Nations. We had democracy went down a bit with the rise of fascism and communism, but starting in the 1970s, democracy has increased, even if it is threatened. Markets have made the world more prosperous. We have poverty worldwide going down. We have literacy going up. We have lifespan going up. In most of human history, people lived till 30. Now they live to 70 or 80.
So if all these good things happen in this, let's say, last 3 decades, 4 decades, why today is not the way to go? Why don't we just keep what has been successful and move ahead with it?
Well, some people have been left out, either economically because their jobs have vanished, but also culturally, ideologically. It's the supporters of authoritarian populism, of Trump and Orban and Brexit. They tend to be white men who are more rural, less educated, more older, baby boomers or older. And they feel all these things are happening and they're left behind. Society favors everyone but them. They react to high rates of immigration. They feel often threatened by that. To technological change. So it's a reaction, I think, to some of these forces of progress. And it's not a new idea. Ever since the Enlightenment came about in the 18th century, there was a counter-enlightenment of fascism and romanticism and nationalism and romantic militarism, the idea that war is good because it's heroic and manly. So Enlightenment and counter-enlightenment have always been in tension. And in the last 5 years, we've seen counter-enlightenment pushing back.
But then you're optimist that we will come back to the center, to the path.
I hope so, and there's some reasons. I would not make a prediction about the next 5 years, but over the long run, there are forces that will push in that direction. One of them is urbanization. When people move to urban areas, they tend to become more liberal. The other is education. When people get more education, and that's what's happening across the world, they tend to be less sympathetic to nationalist populism. And simply generational turnover. Support for Trump and similar politics are much higher among older people than younger people. And people, crucially, now you might say, well, what difference does that make if when people get older, they get more populist or more conservative? But that turns out not to be true. So as the people in their 70s die and the people in their 20s take their place, probably populism will become less popular.
Well, that's a great
There's
concept, and I hope it works because I'm confused right now. Let's go to a break and volvemos enseguida.
Yeah, good. I can mention one other factor. Global. Yeah.
El 20 de enero de 2017, Donald Trump rindió protesta como el presidente número 45 de los Estados Unidos de América. Una fecha en el calendario que ha representado un movimiento abrupto en el escenario mundial gracias al impulso de políticas que han resultado disruptivas para el orden establecido. Esta situación se ha trasladado a otros espacios del tablero global, lugares en Europa, Asia y desde luego Latinoamérica, sin dejar de lado a México, han sufrido este tipo de transmutaciones en la política, la economía y la sociedad, dejando en duda la supervivencia de los ideales liberales. ¿Puede la psicología dar una explicación a estos fenómenos en la era de las definiciones?
Bien, aquí estamos nuevamente de regreso con Steven. Es sumamente interesante lo que nos está platicando. Steven, let's continue with the concept that you think that always the wild or savage waters will come back to the river and will keep us on the right track. But I have a question here. Who makes them? And I refer to the Trumps, the guys from the Brexit, this kind of, I call them messianic leaders. It grows in them, or they just detect, maybe through algorithms or maybe through some research, that that's what people want to hear, so they prepare their message according to the audience that they have, and they move on. I've been having profound discussions in my presentations in universities with the people from the Brexit, and but I found out that it's not casualty that we have a Trump in United States, that we have others coming very strongly in Europe with the same philosophy of nation state. And so it's a movement more than people, but it's supported by a lot of people, at least 1/3 of humankind, or maybe 40% now. The case of Mexico, this incredible change that we did with the election of this new president, that is, it totally falls apart from what we were doing for years and years, and he came with new ideas, and he won the election with a majority. He controls Congress, and it's difficult to understand why people gave him all that power concentrated in one person. Is that a conscious decision for people, or you just vote thinking personally, and all of a sudden all the votes aggregated come up with a 52% win?
Yes, it's hard to know why power gets concentrated like that. In the United States as well, the Republican Party has the presidency, the legislature, and the judiciary, all three branches of government, even though their support is a minority in each case, because a complicated story of how democracy gets manipulated. And what's crucial in a functioning democracy is that the institutions, the mechanisms be strong enough so that just one maniac, one narcissist can't easily take over the government and become a dictator. But we don't really know how firm those institutions are.
And this 21st century will bring, well, a lot of surprises, but today most of them are being discussed. Unemployment, the case of migrations, which is maybe one additional cause for isolation or building walls, is thinking on migration, that now is not the great asset that nations were built with, and now is rejected. And what do you see all these forces moving at the very end? What we should human beings be doing or thinking, or how do we navigate on this uncertain?
In some ways, another limitation of nationalist, isolationist populism is that the world is not going to go away. And there are some problems that are just inherently global that have to be solved with global cooperation. Migration is obviously a huge one. The pollution, especially climate change, there's only one atmosphere. And in the same way that the world had to come together to fix the ozone hole, the world kind of came together in Paris. Trump rejected that, but his successor may have to re-enter. There's terrorism, often crosses national borders, especially with contraband and drugs. Rogue states like North Korea. And even trade. Countries like the idea that their products will be exported, but on the other hand, they also like cheap goods that people can afford to buy, and they want for other countries to accept their exports. There has to be some reciprocity. So things are going to naturally force countries to be global, especially with the internet, with easy transportation, that it's just going to be impossible to build a wall around a country.
Give me a minute, we're going to a break and we'll come right back. Enseguida regresamos con ustedes.
El Dr. Steven Pinker es un apasionado de los estudios labrados a partir de la psicología. Desde muy joven, se concentró en el análisis de la naturaleza humana, en las controversias científicas y el misterioso mundo de las redes neuronales y el funcionamiento de la mente. Hoy, fruto de su gusto por las ideas, el análisis complejo y profundo, la elección de preguntas relevantes y la explicación de las mismas, es uno de los profesores más destacados de la psicología en el mundo. Una persona en busca de nuevos paradigmas de pensamiento en esta era de las definiciones.
In migration, I think the only solution is to go to the source. And if Syrians are abandoning their home, it's because of violence.
Yes.
So you have to stop violence so that people can stay at home.
Yes, and
if there is poverty and desertification, again, people has to go somewhere else to look for food or to nourish their families, and so on and on. Even education, where you don't have where to educate yourself, you move to somewhere else. So you agree with me that the solution has to be go and solve the problem where it's its origin?
Totally agree. Because people don't really like to pick up, leave their family, leave their friends, leave their home and travel hundreds or thousands of miles. They do it often when they're desperate. And we see that migrant flows can stop or even be reversed when the economy, when the safety of the original country improves. And it happened with the United States and Mexico as the direction of migration changed.
Yeah, and it's changing because Mexico has been able to progress and create jobs. Right now, Mexico has full employment almost nationally. And that's a result as a produce of NAFTA. And then again, we question trading, we question trade agreements when they are part of the solution, specifically on migration, because now we can hold our people here because there are jobs available. Now, this idea of I'm going to bring back the jobs that Mexico stole from us, I'm going to bring them back to the United States. Then it's like the pendulum. Now we go that way, and the jobs to the United States, and Mexico unemployed, poor, violent. What is the result?
I completely agree. And another benefit of trade, in addition to just increasing prosperity, and that is a big idea of the Enlightenment, that trade makes both sides richer. Trade is not a competition. It's not a war. Both sides get richer. But also, what's less appreciated, also an idea from the Enlightenment, is that trade makes countries more peaceful. The countries that trade with each other a lot are less likely to go to war because you don't kill your customers. You don't kill your debtors. If it's cheaper to buy something than to steal it, then you're not going to steal it.
Yes. That's true, but then you get a guy like Trump and he says, no, that's not right.
Well, Trump is a perfect counter-Enlightenment figure. These ideas, he is a modern counter-Enlightenment figure.
Okay. Any other comments you want to share with our audience? We have just a couple of minutes left.
Well, you mentioned leadership at the beginning of our conversation. And what is crucial for successful leadership is that it not be used as a way of gratifying the ego of the leader to accrue power, because there's always that temptation. But the great leaders are ones that set the well-being of their people as one of their goals. And in many countries, a big transition, and leaders matter a huge amount, is when you get a shift from a leader who only cares about his own glory to a leader who links his glory to the well-being of his country.
That's absolutely what we do here in this place. And maybe it's because I have this Jesuit inspiration of Loyola, which I went to Jesuit schools from kindergarten up to university, and I was printed here that the shortcut to happiness is doing for others. And the more you do for others, the more benefits you get for yourself. And so what we teach here is what we have named compassive leadership. So because that's the only leadership that transcends, when you're really thinking about the other, thinking about your community, your nation, and not selfish thinking. So I share that with you enormously. You don't know how much we are honored for your presence here in this place. Your books are a success in Mexico, and I know they're in Spanish. I like to read them in English, which is the original place. I thank you for sharing those thoughts. I think everybody's inspired on reading those, and everybody's changing a little bit the way we look at the world and the way we look at our future. So thank you for being here, for sharing with the audience in CTEC of your thinking. We're honored to have you here, and we hope to be back with you here next year.
I hope so. The honor is mine. Thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Hasta la próxima.